Barry, he will be here 10 years in August.
Yep.
And he has done a remarkable job, and I know many of you know him well. Andrea Surratt's working with him too. She's been here about almost 8 years, I believe now, and overseeing a lot of the big projects there.
Thanks, Mandy. So, the only way I can think to really compliment Mandy is that she has defined her own brand. We always talk about Kleenex, and immediately somebody knows what that is, but that's actually the manufacturer. It's really a facial tissue. But when people talk about getting a message out and having enthusiasm for a community, they always say, someone like Mandy, someone like Mandy, a Mandy-like person. And so we're so grateful to have Mandy and Dana, in so many ways being the face of the city and out in the community making things happen. They're fantastic. So you all have our PowerPoint in your hand. We wanted you to have that so you can be looking at it, be familiar with it, and ask questions. We want this to be really interactive. Spend maybe the next 20 or 30 minutes, as Mandy mentioned, telling you about where we are and where we're going. Want to thank Jill Patton, Councilwoman, and Hank Guest, Councilman, for being here this evening. Appreciate their time and their talents that they bring to lead the city and move us forward. So let's take a quick look back. As much as I hate to do this, and as painful as it is, I think it's always important. This chart is stark. We've taken it all over the state. We've talked to a lot of people about it. Job growth in the metro areas of North Carolina between 2000 and 2012. And we stand out like a sore thumb. 20%. Over 30,000 jobs lost in that 12-year period of time. And for many of y'all, we were already in a state of decline before 2000. We were already seeing some impacts of NAFTA and some loss of manufacturing jobs, and then it accelerated. Every other MSA in the state, well, 2 other MSAs had minor job loss, some had some minor job growth, but others had significant job growth. I'm not going to go into this chart a lot, but it's all related to who we are and who we have been. We're disproportionately heavy in manufacturing. We always have been. We're proud of that. But as manufacturing changed across the entire country, whether it was through technology or whether it's through offshoring, we got disproportionately hit because we typically have had between 40 and 50% manufacturing jobs. The national average is 20%. So when manufacturing takes a dive, we get hit harder than other areas. And that, of course, translates into population growth, or lack thereof. So same kind of chart. We're doing fine in terms of our growth of kind of the baby boomers, my generation and up. But what's disconcerting is that the families, the kind of people starting their businesses and getting going, we're actually losing population between the category of 20 to 44-year-olds. And those tend to be your drivers in the community. That's a key, important piece of every community to have. So it's an important kind of leadership principle to face the reality. What's going on in our community? Let's not stick our head in the sand. Let's face it. Let's deal with it. And about 18 months ago, leaders throughout the community came together. And the partners included Catawba County, of course, the City of Hickory, Fry, Catawba Valley Medical Center, LR, CVCC, the Chamber. Between 40 and 50 leaders were involved in it on a bi-weekly basis with meetings, and then we went even broader than that and got hundreds of people in the community involved in various surveys, various focus groups. Basically, putting together a strategic plan for the entire community that became named Innovate Catawba. And we were an integral part of that. Out of Innovate Catawba came 6 areas of focus. And I really think it's important for us to talk about this because I know as you pick up different pieces in the media or different meetings, it can get a little bit confusing. What's Hickory doing? What's Catawba County doing? How does all this fit together? And I'm going to stop right there and ask if there's any questions or discussion or anything. I want to make sure that as things come into your mind, we're pulling them out and talking about them. Is this familiar to you all? Good, okay, so that's a good sign. I see some heads nodding, so some of you all have heard that already. So the 6 areas, we're going to touch on some of them in more detail, but inspiring, we recognize that we needed to be a more attractive community. We've gotten a little dated. We have some incredible assets. When you watch that video, you're just thinking, that's a place I want to live, right? I want to move there. But in a lot of ways, those assets are something that my generation inherited from the previous generations, some incredible assets. But it's a competitive environment. It's a competitive world for people and for jobs. You've got to constantly be doing more and better. Reinventing, we're going to talk about that a good bit. How do you change your economy? How do you change your physical infrastructure? Building for jobs. Those three, Andrew and I are going to talk a lot about, because those ended up being the three categories where the city of Hickory in particular kind of was tagged and stepped up to take a real leadership role in the broader community. And we're going to talk in detail about that. But there are other groups and great people involved in these categories as well, and they all intersect with each other. I mean, obviously, entrepreneurs that have in the workforce jives with your buildings and the types of businesses you're trying to attract, and then leadership overall in the community, as well as communicating well with our residents. So as I mentioned, we kind of started talking in terms of, well, let's take Innovate Catawba and talk about Innovate Hickory, because that's kind of our role in the bigger plan. And our role specifically, as I mentioned, relates to inspiring, reinventing, reuse of buildings, and then industrial parks and building. So with that, I'm going to flip it over to Andrea, and she's going to dig a little bit more into the inspiring and the reinventing pieces.
Thanks, Mick. So, as Mick mentioned, those three categories gave us a lot of work to do, to come up with plans and proposals for City Council to consider. How does one re-energize, redevelop, reinvent our community? And it's not a one-person thing, it's not a one committee task, it's really a number of different partners. So that was the task in front of us, and every city faces this. It's unusual for a city never to have to consider what making that community better would do for them in terms of their local economy. So what that translates to for us is, how can we be more competitive? We have the metro area of Charlotte. We are considered to be right in the fringe of that. We're not in the I-5, I-40 crescent for Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill, all the way to Wilmington, but we are on a major interstate, and we are positioned nicely between Asheville and Charlotte. So we have a lot of assets that we can offer. But we have to stay competitive, and we have to look as a community like we are reinvesting every day, little bit by little bit, and so that there's something new and different that when people come here that they see. So this slide just explains to you the process that we started with, which is that City Council then traveled to a number of cities over a couple of years, and also our Inspiring Spaces Committee traveled to some cities that had gone through economic decline and then reinvented themselves, found a way to change it and make it better and make it an attractive place for business and for young people and for entrepreneurs. And so Durham is just, this is one example, and the statement really sort of hits home to me. And Dave talked particularly about the investment Durham made in its downtown. And if you've been there in the last several years, you know that vibrancy that I'm speaking about. But it wasn't always so. They had a lot of private investment, but the city itself had to update its downtown. Now, you could say that we need to do that in 7 or 8 areas across town. It's not just a downtown example, but in this situation, Durham felt like it had really been 40 years since they had made any major investment. And that's a time span that shows when you start walking around a community. So with that, the private investors decided that they would put money into it. And with that, the city's investment, private investment, it made investors feel more comfortable about spending money in an area and bringing it back to life. And so since then, Durham has seen almost 2.5 times the private investment in the last 12 years. And then also tax revenues doubled in 8, and you see the number of jobs they tout, 5,000 new jobs, and I'm sure that number is old now. That's probably a 2-year-old number. So let's just go from that to just knowing that we have a role to play in the bigger picture in these 3 categories. With Innovate Hickory, the broader component of those three things, building, reinventing, and inspiring, and with our Inspiring Spaces plan. We're one of the communities that has made an investment in the planning process for our public areas, and that's so important. We would not be responsible stewards for our city government if we didn't provide options for people to think about improving their public area. It's not always about just you as the private citizen improving your front yard. It's about improving our city's front yard as well. And so let's start with the private investment along the lake. This is one of the Inspiring Spaces projects. And so this is the Lackey project, just a really beautiful story to honor Ms. Lackey. And then with that construction, then it transforms a really important park in our city's northwest area. And so this is the map of what is right now Geithner Rotary Park. That would be, I feel like I'm blocking views here. So you would be able to travel and park here and still put your boat in. It would have a sort of a kayak launch, fishing pier, a little amphitheater out onto the lake that then reflects back to this building. This building is a public event space, so it's open inside. You could potentially rent it. So all of this is in design mode right now. And then the last construction is a conservatory, so an indoor-outdoor garden space that's just really lovely and has a place for people to walk around, a place for weddings, and lots of just opportunities to gather. So this reinvestment, the Lackeys have said $3 to $5 million is their number for putting into this project for this first phase. And then the city would then contribute money as well to match, not to match that dollar, but to go toward that project to make it a full project. So what we are doing now is just we're in the design stage, back and forth. We have these plans, you see what we've got right now. That's very exciting. Public investment. So another project that you've been reading about and maybe have experienced already, and that's the Crawdad Stadium renovation, Elkie Grand Stadium. So all the seats got replaced, a lot of the concourse got a new facelift, just a number of improvements out of the ball stadium. So the city put in $1.4 million, but the baseball team put in $1 million. So there's another huge investment by another group that feels that it's important enough for them to spend the dollars to make this space even more attractive for the next 20 years. Because you might not remember, maybe not all of you, I certainly wasn't here, but this stadium is well over 20 years old. So it's showing some wear. It needed to have a few things done and updated. It's a great space. So I want you to envision those two projects having a common denominator. And that common denominator is, it's hard to see, so hopefully your handout could show you as well. So here's the Lackey project, Geithner Park. If one were to travel along a walkway, greenway, river walk, one could travel all the way to the baseball stadium. And so I just put this simple line on the map to show you that there is a lot of opportunity for areas to be redeveloped. So on the west side of the road of Highway 321, right here's the big bridge, going under the bridge on the west side, there's a lot of vacant property. A lot of property that in other cities, the city would partner with that property owner and redevelop into a mixed-use, retail, entertainment area, just a really fun destination place to go to. And we have that potential here in Hickory as well. And then on the east side of the bridge, our water treatment plant is right here, but there is still a beautiful natural area to walk along, one of the most gorgeous parts of Lake Hickory and the river there, being able to go back up along a trail to the Geithner Park area. So those two areas part of Inspiring Spaces that's being worked on, being thought through, and potentially plans would be developed for that. Any questions about that?
Not interested about the bridge, the
Okay,
plan for the bridge.
Good, thank you. All right, so for, this project also includes, the redevelopment, well, there is a redevelopment, a widening of Highway 321, a realigning of the traffic pattern there, and it also includes a new bridge. And so that bridge at this point is planned to be one that spans high and up and over and lands beyond the railroad tracks, closer to Arby's. And so what that does is that allows, first of all, the bridge to be new and different and very inviting, handling the traffic better, but also space under the bridge then is available for this trail.
And that bridge is a federal and state funded
Right,
project.
so there's millions of dollars, 20 to 30, we're not sure of that cost yet for the bridge, for that project. So all of that, park development, trail, bridge development, trail, retail and commercial and residential development potentially here, trail and the baseball stadium and just a number of other potential opportunities. Thank you. So, just a conceptual idea of what that might look like if you've been along a greenway. Sometimes they are like so, where they connected with a city street, and then they have a pathway that meanders through a natural area, and they also can have sort of a waterfront, riverfront design as well, where you can really get out and enjoy the lake. And that's one of the things that we've heard in Inspiring Spaces interviews, is that we just don't have a really amazing place to be on the lake. It has a lot of private development, but we could use more of this type of experience. So let's shift gears just a minute. Another project related to Inspiring Spaces, but really more about just reinventing. And so this is just a snapshot of, and it's a map in your packet that shows, so all of the yellow, you can see all the yellow squares. Those are just potential building footprints for areas of downtown, and that's a much wider, broader view of downtown than maybe we think of today. But that's a number of potential building footprints that could go in and increase the density, the livability, the service availability for downtown. So think about it in terms of, we have a very small town feel for our downtown, but as we potentially grow, there are ways to have residential units plugged into some of the blocks on our streets. Right now, maybe there's a parking lot, and maybe there could be a deck in residential, or shops, a deck in residential. There's a lot more that we can pack into the downtown to make it even more vibrant. And that's something that is really spurred by private development interests, but it's at least something that we're considering, is that even that area has potential for additional corporate campuses. So the corporate campus concept is one that's really showing up in downtowns now and across the country. You've heard the announcement of Transportation Insight being in our broader downtown, just right here. And really, people that work in these corporate headquarters often want to walk to all the services. They want to go out for lunch. They want to get on a sidewalk and jog. They want to walk up a greenway. They want to take time and do things that while they're in the town area. Maybe they even just want to live down the street from their corporate headquarters. So that's something that we have a number of blocks that are well suited for redevelopment for that type of use. Questions about that? I'm going to go too fast. So the next series of slides just shows you how we can take things that we already have that are existing and make them better. And so we don't have to start over in another part of town with a green field necessarily. We have great bones right here in our core area. So this is a Holler hosiery mill. You know this mill probably very well. You may have eaten at the restaurant or gone to an event. But we look at that as one of the first projects that used to be, and this is even after construction began, but I have a worse picture than that. And you probably remember with the graffiti and the broken out windows, and it just looked terrible. But I'm sure some of you could see the beauty of that building, even though it didn't look like it was well cared for. And now it has, amazing occupancy and room for more. So 50 to 100 jobs just in that building alone, and no one had to start from scratch. It was already there. Revitalizing more mill buildings. So when you start one project and it makes a successful splash, then people pay attention. And so here again, the corporate headquarters concept is making its way not only into the core downtown, but in this broader downtown destination. And when you have one, you might have more. And so here's John Moretz taking Moretz Mills headquarters and putting it in Hickory property and renovating that building. Restaurant, service uses, fitness and spa type uses, headquarters, and a number of others. And I'm probably putting one or two there. A number of, so both of those each had about $8 million. Well, Holler was about 6. Moretz is somewhere between 8 and 10 million in investment. That's tax base that we couldn't get with the buildings sitting vacant like they are. So that's new money coming in to raise the value of that whole area. Jobs somewhere between 100 and 200, depending upon when they're finally occupied. Another project. Another great, we are so lucky. There are so many towns that just tear these buildings down, but for some reason we didn't do that to Venice, and here we are with a number of good examples of renovation. And so Paul Thompson, the CEO of Transportation Insight, is moving his headquarters from rented space over by the First Baptist into formal campus space. And not only is he doing this mill renovation, leaving it historically significant, so you'll still be able to see the great building that it is. But he's also he bought a number of other buildings, and so the campus will be not only this building, but expand across the street there, 3rd Street. So that's another way to show some major investment. That number is in that 11 million area. It's high. And a high number of jobs for this particular project because it is that corporate campus. Those jobs could have gone to Charlotte. I think that's we don't like to think that could happen, but it really could. And here's a second company that chose to stay in Hickory as opposed to moving to Charlotte to another location. So this is the Piedmont Wagon Building. If you go out Main Avenue, this is the building at 9th and Main. It's the oldest industrial buildings left standing in Hickory, and it is now going to have its new owner and new space for anywhere. Right now they have 45 employees, and they're going to 75. So again, lights are on. There'll be people parking in that space. There are other small buildings in that area that will just see transformation. When you have that many people coming and going, it really changes up the dynamics of that area. Lights on makes a huge difference for safety and for viability. So Main Avenue now got a new shot in the arm all the way down to 9th, and that can continue further as time goes on. They had about $3 million in investment for that building. So you can't just that building on the tax books was just hundreds of thousands of dollars, and then he had to put $3 million into that building, and of course it won't appraise at that, but the value there is that he decided it was worth that investment to save that building, to have a great space, to recruit employees, and to be in a sort sort of a cool building. I mean, that's the trend, and we're glad to have that space. So not every building is old and historic, but there are some great areas of town that are seeing some revitalization. And so Highway 70 has been one of our major commercial corridors for years before I-40. And so here's an example of when we needed to tear down something to make room for something more needed in the community. So you might remember the old Regency on Highway 70 at 4th Street. And so with that demolition, then property owners are able to have a Walmart neighborhood market come in. This is a new prototype for Walmart. It's 90% groceries, 10% or 50 or so sundries. So just something else that addresses the food desert issue that you probably read about. And redevelopment, so that's an anchor, and then you know the landscape in that area, it looks for other redevelopment. Quite. And so with that, I'll turn it back over to Mr. Barry for
So
new development.
any questions about the redevelopment that's going on and the city's role in that? The city council has a couple of different policies that they adopted a few years ago that we think were key in bringing some of that redevelopment about. They created a grant program for vacant buildings for demolition. So each of these projects that Andrea talked about did get some support from the city, but it's literally dimes on the dollar. The city council would partner with the county to waive demo fees to help with the cost of demolition, costing $20,000 or $30,000 for a $10 million investment. We also, depending, each project's a little bit different in terms of what they need to redevelop. Sometimes it's sidewalks, it's curb and gutter, it's road improvements, things like that that are the public space anyway, it's lighting. If you think about Lenore Ryan Boulevard, remember when it was being fixed, forever? DOT had to build the new bridge for the rail, and it seemed like it would never be open again. And then city council kind of stepped out because DOT was just going to do the bare minimum like they always do. And city council stepped up and said, we're going to spend another $100,000 or so putting in sidewalks and lighting and shrubbery and actually making that a nice roadway. And that was part of, what made Holler, what made Moretz, it's a great transportation corridor. You got good traffic count. Now you've got a prettier road, better access. We give them some grants and development starts taking place. Plus, right now, the federal government gives historic grants as tax credits. Okay, so when these companies go in and get these buildings, they're actually able to take a tax credit against their federal income. So it doesn't affect us locally, but it affects their business. And so that's a federal policy that's helping this redevelopment take place as well.
Nick,
Yeah.
on the Route 321 bridge, are you saying that you're going to take out the old bridge and put a brand new bridge across the river?
Yeah. Now, it's when you say we, it's not us, it's the federal government. That's a Highway 321 is a federal state thoroughfare.
So is this bridge in need of replacement?
Yeah, the bridge is about 50 years old. It's got two issues. It's falling apart, but the other issue is it can't carry the load anymore. And so what they'll do is they'll actually go in and they'll build one span while they leave another span going. It'll never shut down. It'll get congested. As Andrea mentioned, it's going to be a huge bridge. If you think about the way right now as you're coming from Caldwell County, you kind of dive down the lake, and the bridge is about at lake level. I knew a guy who had a boat one time that was too big to go under. Just complain about that all the time. Who complains about having too big of a boat? But now it's going to basically not dive down anymore. It's going to fly over, as Andrea said, almost all the way to the next intersection. So we saw that as a great opportunity, to connect the river on both sides from the baseball stadium over to the park. Imagine people driving from all the development up in the mountains. Wouldn't it be great if people in Blowing Rock and in Boone, that have second homes up there were saying, well, we ought to go down to Hickory because there's a concert down there at the baseball stadium, or, and there's a whole environment there. So that's going to be a federal project. It's in the planning phase right now. It's funded. It's still going to be, several years out before the bridge is actually built, but it is going to happen. Thank you. Good question. Other questions? Okay.
Mick, I've got a question. I'm sorry, I missed part of the meeting, but what are we doing to attract that demographic, the 20 to 40-year-old group?
Well, in simple terms, we're trying to attract jobs for them. I mean, that's the most important thing, right? We all go someplace because we got a job, especially when you're in your 20s and 30s. When you get a little bit older, maybe you're retired or whatever, you can pick and choose a little bit more. So it's about job recruitment, but it's also about having a vibrant place to live. You know, Paul Thompson, founder, chairman now, he's not the CEO anymore, but of Transportation Insight, a great guy, a great local business guy, very committed to this community. When he first started talking about his needs of moving to Charlotte and stuff, and he talked to me and Scott Millar, of course, we were like, whoa, 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 Paul, you don't need to go to Charlotte. You need to stay right here. Well, he was very candid with us. He said, look, I'm hiring kids straight out of college. And it's a recruiting disadvantage for me to be in Hickory because they don't feel like there's anything to do. And so we started laying out to him all of these plans that you all are seeing and what we're talking about, inspiring spaces and opportunities like out the lake and stuff. And we said, Paul, we're not going to be the community of the future that we are right now. And he bought into it. I mean, he is putting his money into Hickory. He's investing his and his company's money in Hickory, believing in this reinvestment that's going to take place. If you saw his plans, he's building his own basketball court indoors for his employees. He's building soccer fields that will be partnered with the city in terms of we'll be able to use them and they'll be lighted. It'll all be there out on his campus. And so he kind of gets it from both sides. He said, if you all make the public investment to make better transportation opportunities for people to walk downtown and to do the things that Andrew was talking about, I'll make investments too for my employees, and together we can renovate this whole area. But it still comes back to jobs, right? So he's creating jobs in the downtown core, and I kind of look at that as, that's kind of like your headquarter play, okay? That's your white-collar service sector job. We think we can attract a lot of those jobs in this downtown core. We're not going to get big manufacturing jobs in the downtown core, so that takes us to this. For about, seems like forever, but it's probably only been about 3 or 4 years, I've been working with a whole bunch of different folks to put together a new business park in Hickory. Because right now, when we bring prospects into Hickory who are looking to do manufacturing, they like our workforce. They like our cost structure. They like our low taxes. They like the fact that we're not union. They like a lot of things about us. But the speed of business now is just like that. And you can't come in and say, oh yeah, there's some raw land over there that you guys ought to build a plant. You're gone. They won't even come and visit you. The success that we have had in the last 5 years has been companies coming into existing buildings that did meet their need. Unfortunately, a lot of those older manufacturing buildings don't meet current needs of manufacturers. Okay? So Turbo Coating, Turbo Tech, these are companies that provide products in the energy sector. It's very sophisticated manufacturing. It's polymer coating of materials on things. We were able to get them here in the hundreds of jobs that they represent because we were lucky in that we had a building that worked for them and a building they thought they could expand. But we don't have enough of that inventory. So for the last couple of years, I've been working with a whole bunch of folks. We're still keeping it a little bit quiet because there's going to have to be a rezoning process we're going to go through, and we just within the last month got most of the owners all on board of the property, and we have options signed and everything. But it's a new business park that will be in the city of Hickory, between 200 and 300 acres, has the potential literally for thousands of jobs. We've gone out and we've benchmarked other business parks. We said, what is it that we think our niche is in Hickory? We think it's sophisticated, high-tech manufacturing. We're creating a business park that will have restrictions on it. So a lot of people, when they buy in the neighborhood, they want to know that, you know, my neighbor can't go slap up something next to his house, right? There's restrictions in the neighborhood. They like that. Industry's the same way. They want to come into a business park that knows, what are my neighbors going to look like? What are the restrictions on them? What kinds of jobs will they be? Will they be clean? Will they be high-tech? Will they be similar to what I am? And we went and visited business parks around the state, and we grabbed their information and understand how they've been designed, how they've been laid out. And we feel like we've got a great opportunity to play successfully in the high-tech, what they call Class A industrial park. And so it's not just all about the downtown stuff. It's about having the manufacturing core that we've always been about and just taking that to the next level. Any questions about that? again, this is probably the piece you haven't heard as much about because literally last week we got the last signed option from the family, from a family member to go in this. Mary?
Are they going to spec build?
Great question. The second phase of the conversation is, okay, well, let's clarify what's the government's role in this, okay? And why are we even in this business? Andy Wells, one of our representatives, will be here. He and I talked about this a couple years ago, and he's like, Mick, I don't want the city to be in the development business. That's what I do. I said, Andy, I don't want to be in it either. But guess what? Every other community is in it. And he goes, I know, I can't compete against that. How does a private developer who has to make money on the project compete with a government that's more interested in creating tax base and jobs? I mean, literally, you have competitors of ours who give away the real estate. Can you do that as a developer? I mean, you're out of business. So, unfortunately, it's just kind of where the competition has brought us. The local governments have to get in that business. We are still trying to take a very conservative approach in that we've done a lot of the groundwork. So what we're trying to do is put together a plan, have it all under option, have infrastructure either being built or ready to be built in place, so it's getting to as turnkey as possible. And then we really hope that we can hand that option to purchase to Company A and let them buy the land. You know, we'll have to give them some tax incentives, you always do. But we really don't want to buy and own the park. We want to kind of be a facilitator of all that happening. So to Mary's question, the next logical point is, do you do a spec building out there? And we feel like this is such a great concept, and it's getting validated because private developers are coming to us saying, we'd be interested in putting a building out there. On their dime. They want us to hedge some of the risk for them. Can you waive some fees? Can you take care of some of the property tax carrying costs until we get it sold? I mean, can you do some things to make it easier for us to get out there? So those conversations are going on. It makes us feel really good. That's private people thinking this can work. Mr. President, former president.
The location for this where?
Yeah, I'm not going to get into that right this second. It will be soon. I know. And my next map.
Well, there's a big dome that I drive by, and I just wonder if it's inside there.
No big dome yet. But it literally within the next couple weeks you will know. We want to go out and talk to the neighbors. We want to talk to people ahead of time before the owners formally petition for, not for annexation, but for rezoning. Once that happens, it's going to all be out there and everybody will know. Okay? And we'll have people with pitchforks going crazy because they don't want it there.
We have got a workforce here that's available, but it is not competitive. It doesn't have you worked out a system with the educational system.
That's a very astute, great question. The simple high-level answer, Frank, is yes, in that CVCC especially is connected to the hip with this plan of what we're doing. But what they can do is they still have to be somewhat general until you actually know who the company is. So, I'll tell you, they have been great at turning on a dime and creating programs. So for turbo coating, for TurboTech, they literally, on the fly, created a program that was training to go into that company. Same thing they do for Getrack Gears down in May. I mean, they are very good at doing that. But it's so dynamic, I mean, it's like you got to change those programs depending on the company every year, every 6 months. And, I give them pretty good marks. I mean, they can always do better. But I give them pretty good marks. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I just, because the high-tech class, that's going to take a big chunk from manufacturing furniture or socks.
Yeah, but we've got, yeah, that's true. It is. But you also are targeting, not just the folks who are like me, maybe in our 50s, who have been in the more historic manufacturing, but we're really targeting, kids out of high school, kids with 2-year degrees out of college who are coming in and hey, they know how to run a CNC router. They know how to program the machinery that sprays the polymers, on the turbines and turbo coating. They can learn that. So it's, you're trying to find that sweet spot of taking care of our existing folks, but also planning for that future, planning for those young families and demographics we talked about. All right, so President Brown's question, where is it? Did I already show that map? Okay, I'm not going to go back to it since she didn't pick up on where it was. I'll give you one last look at it. That's it right there. It's a great location though, and it's already got a lot of infrastructure to it. So
It's in the city limits, because it says Ottawa County.
it will be. Every single one of those options, it says, will not be sold until annexed by the city. So we got that under control.
Behind Roses back there?
No comment. But it will be county commissioners that rezone it, and then city council will annex it. Okay? Yes, ma'am.
We're going to do all this for recreation, these parks and things. So we have a park here that I had to apologize to a friend I took over, Stephen over the Van Hilton Park. I had to apologize to her about all the trees being down, all the debris in the water.
Yeah.
So what do we do with what we already have?
Yeah, that's a great point.
That's what, I mean, that's recreation. That, everybody enjoys going over there, walking the walk, the boardwalk, feeding the ducks.
Yep.
And it's a mess over there.
Let's talk about that in just a second, because that fits in with kind of what I'm going to say here kind of toward the end in terms of how do we go forward, what we do. Because you're right, you can't build stuff and not maintain it.
Right, and we're not maintaining.
And we have, and I'll tell you, with the downturn of the economy and with no increases in property tax or sales tax revenues, we have been, as a city, struggling to maintain what we have. I will give you that. It's been a challenge. And I told, when I meet with coworkers in groups like this and we talk about the budget, I tell them, I said, you're going to think I'm schizophrenic. Because on one hand, I'm going to be nickel and diming you, and on the other hand, you're going to hear me go into city council saying, we need to spend big bucks to do these kinds of projects. And somewhere in there, there's got to be more of a happy balance where we are taking care of what we have and maintaining what we have as well as adding new. All right, so now let's get down to what y'all have always been wondering about. So where does the money come from? How do you do this? And what does the money get spent on? So everything that Andrea's talked about, the things that I've talked about, it's primarily infrastructure. I mean, it's primarily the things that cities have traditionally done. It's building roads, it's improving roads, it's building sidewalks, it's pedestrian access. We have been doing that since we were created. It's doing it at a higher level with things called streetscapes, with things called greenways, you know. I mean, I'm telling you, you go to a modern city nowadays, greenways are it, man. People want to build on greenways. We just went down to Little Sugar Creek Greenway with city council, and I mean, there's hotels on it, there's condos, there's shops, and there's people walking that thing like crazy. Isn't it funny? Our ancestors would think we were nuts. You know, I mean, they wanted to get in wagons and drive. Now we got all the wagons and cars and stuff, and what do we want to do? We want to walk. That's how it works, right? Things change. So what are our opportunities for coming up with funds to make these public investments? Everybody always talks about federal and state grants, and we work that hard. We have a company we work with out of DC that is constantly pursuing opportunities, and we're somewhat successful. We do, it's hard to say we get our share of grants because you always want more, but we do get federal and state grants from time to time. So we think that's going to be an important sliver of it. I personally think the biggest piece of it is going to, from the public sector side, is going to be bonds. We're going to talk about that in a minute, okay? Fees. You have opportunities when new businesses come in to charge them tap fees to hook on your water and sewer system. You might have fees related to parking at some point in time. I mean, so not taxes per se, but other revenues that the city has opportunities to raise. Philanthropy is really an important part of this. I mean, the lackeys just blew us away when they came to us and said, we want to do something to recognize Deidre. We were so humbled, and I mean, they're just such great, wonderful people in the community. And we saw that in all the other communities we visited, that the business leaders, the very successful families gave back to the communities. They've done that in Hickory. They're doing it more. That will be an important part of it. New business investments can end up being the biggest piece, and just like we talked about, Transportation Insights, Moretz, Holler, they're putting in thousands of dollars for every public dollar that gets invested. And that's going to be very critical and important. Any questions about that slide? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about bonds and how they work. Bonds are debt, okay? Cities can borrow money with what's called a bond, and people buy them off the stock market, and we pay interest to those people as they hold those bonds. City council will need to decide within the next about a month, basically which projects do we feel like need to be in phase one, how much are they going to cost, and come up with kind of a bond package. That whole process is mandated by state law. Okay, you do it exactly the way the state law tells you to do it, or you won't sell bonds. And I've just kind of given you just a few bullet points on it. Basically, we would be targeting a November 4th election date. You can't hold a special election. You used to could do that. State law changed. Now you have to have it either on a primary, which is in 2 weeks, or you have to have it in a general election. Okay, so those are the rules. That's what we're playing by. Categories on the ballot itself are in state law. There's about 40 of them. And I mean, your ballot, when you ask your voters to go vote for these bonds, it's going to be this gobbledygook language that comes straight out of state law. You have no choice. And some of the categories, for example, roads and transportation is one kind of a broad category. Business parks for jobs is another broad category. Recreation facilities is another broad category. The city, in terms of me, Andrea, city council's budget, y'all's tax dollars, cannot be used to campaign for the bonds. All we can do is provide the information. We can say, here are the facts. We can put it on our website. We can make presentations like this. But we can't be out saying, vote for it, don't vote for it, whatever. That's going to have to be you all. That's going to have to be citizens of the community to say, hey, you know what, we believe in this. We're going to be part of raising money. We're going to run a campaign. We're going to vote for Hickory's future. The city doesn't do that. And of course, ultimately, you all vote on the bond referendum.
Question.
Yep.
General obligation or revenue?
General obligation. You can only do a revenue bond if you have a dedicated revenue source. So, for example, we have built a wastewater treatment plant, we built a water plant in the past that was coming from the monthly bills that each of us pay for our water. But when you're talking about building roads or building industrial parks, there isn't a commensurate revenue source that goes with that. Now, there's some very esoteric,
Right.
yeah, you could use some tax increment financing, yeah. You're probably familiar with that, Frank. There are some sophisticated things you can do with certain areas. I think our feeling as staff, and I think council agrees with it, that our plan is so broad, so citywide, we want to try to tackle it from this out of the Middle East first. If the voters for some reason say no, I think we'll have to go to Plan B. We're hoping that's not the case. So a general obligation bond is the full faith and credit of the city. So that means the general tax dollars, which is two things, property tax and sales tax. Those are the two big drivers of your city budget. Your taxes that you pay and the taxes we all pay when we go to a grocery store, go to Walmart, whatever. Just to kind of give you a sense, our average residential home in Hickory is $150,000. You pay to the city of Hickory right now 50 cents on the $100 of value. Monthly, you pay $62.50 in property tax. And if you're like me, I don't own my home, my bank owns my home. So they actually take that out every month of my mortgage payment, and then the city sends the bill basically to me and to the bank, and then the bank pays it for me out of my escrow account. $40 million is a number that we just kind of put out there as a benchmark number to start working from. You all, if you saw the Hickory Daily Record this morning, heard it was now $55 million. Because one of our great residents was just talking in a meeting, and he happened to get the headline, right, Meredith? It just puzzles me how that works. It's like take anything out of context, and that becomes a story. Anyway, whatever, it's fun. But just for sake of understanding how it works, $40 million would basically increase your monthly amount to $10 a month. If you own a $150,000 house, you get $72.50. $30 million is $7.50 a month. $20 million is $5 a month. $10 million, $2.50 a month. Yes, sir.
This chart bothers me.
Okay.
First of all, last fall, Mayor Wright was talking about the total cost of expiring spaces being about $80 million. Now, if you go for $40 million in bonds, how long will it take to pay off those bonds?
20 years.
20 years. I won't be around again.
Typically.
But I'm still facing a 16% tax increase.
So you got to ask yourself, are you investing in the future?
Okay, I am retired, living on fixed income. I don't know that I want to pay that.
It's a fair.
Because I'm having difficulty seeing benefits to myself personally. I can see a lot of benefit for the community.
Let's
if it
recruit those
works.
young healthcare workers
If
who
it
will help take
works.
care of you when you get older. I'm in the medical field.
Well,
you
you
need
know,
I'm
and I like the way that Ruby says it, the Mayor Wright says it, because he's spot on. Every single one of us has a stake in this. Because someday, whether you or your heirs are going to want to sell your property. And if there aren't people here that want to buy your property, what's going to happen to the price? I mean, we all know supply and demand, right? I mean, tax revaluation is going on in the Catawba County right now. And you know what it's going to do to every single one of us? It's going to, the value of our properties are on average going to go down. We've already started talking to the tax department and said, how much are they going down? They won't give us a straight number yet, but it's going to go down. I mean, you're literally seeing the impact on your property, your residence, your business of the overall disinvestment and kind of malaise that we've been in economically here in Hickory. I mean, a lot of you all were here when it was just the opposite, right? Man, good grief, it was going up like crazy. We all loved it. I mean, we didn't like paying more taxes, but we loved the fact that, you know, my $150,000 house is now worth $180,000. I like that idea. You know, I mean, we're all investing in this together as a community. And you're spot on. That's a fair
What
statement.
is the target date of the bonds going up?
Well, the election would be,
Money be held in escrow as a part.
well, you have 10 years you have 7 years, and then you can get a 3-year extension to spend the money. You only actually sell the bonds as you need it, Frank. So you don't come right out day one. So if the election is November 4th, on November 5th, the city has to go sell $40 million worth of bonds.
I know that, but what I'm saying is, what's the target date? Are you gonna do 40 million at one time, or are you gonna do 20 million at one time?
Well, I don't know that.
Cost wise, it'd be cheaper to do 40 million.
It would be. You're right. You're exactly right. Because your overhead cost of putting out bonds is about the same whether you do 40 or 20 or 10. I think that's where city council is right now, is wrestling through, you know, what is that number? What do they think the voters can support? What projects are the most important? You know, I mean, that's right where they are. They got to figure that out in the next month or so to start that process. Now, they can refine it. They could start out and say, this is initially our first resolution, saying this is what we want to do. Then you have some public hearing. You have a public hearing on it, and they can tweak that and adjust it. But ultimately, sometime in about August or so, you got to say, this is it. This is what we're putting on the ballot. This is what we're going for. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, basically, what would be your target date approximately? I know it's going to be approved, et cetera, but what would be your target date to go and raise the money?
To actually sell the bonds. It'd be sometime, the first phase would be sometime early next year. Yes, ma'am.
What would be the terms of the bond?
20-year term. The interest rates vary, but we're in that 3 to 4% range right now.
Can you get fixed rates?
It's a competitive
For
bid.
seven.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of different ways you can structure it. And what you do is you actually hire a financial advisor and a bond counsel, so an attorney and a financial advisor. And they look at all your numbers and they figure out, here's the best way for you to sell these. This is going to be the most cost-effective way. Now, I've kind of just glossed over the fact that you have a city that is in incredible financial shape. You have a relatively small city that has a AA bond rating. That is phenomenal. Right now, the course the city is on, we will be debt-free in the general fund in 6 years. And we have no debt. I mean, you need to be proud of that. On one hand, it's good. On the other hand, maybe that means we need to borrow some money and make some investments. The only debt we have is on the brand new wastewater treatment plant that we just built. That's a revenue bond that's being paid for by all of our monthly bills to the, for our water and sewer that we pay. So you're in a great financial position to take this on. I mean, all the bond people are saying, oh yeah, you're not going to have any problem. You're going to love the Hickory bonds. You're in good shape. So just to remember, and I love this quote that Brad Lell gave at the Chamber annual meeting. If nothing changes, nothing changes. And we see the trend that we're on, we're in. You know, I think we as city staff and city council have recognized something's got to change. We can't stay on this course. It's up to us really as a community to decide what is the course we want to get on, how do we change. We involve a lot of people in Innovate Catawba and Innovate Hickory and Inspiring Spaces. This whole planning process has been going on for 2 years, and now the rubber's going to meet the road. And we collectively as a community are going to decide, are we moving forward, or are we okay where we are? Do we want to move in a different direction, or how does this go? You all ultimately are the best resource of this community, right? You all are the people who make the businesses, who live here, who pay the taxes, who work here. I mean, this is your city, it's your community. We're humbled and honored to be public servants working for the city of Carabiner. Since I graduated from college in 1990, I love it. I feel very blessed to have raised my family here. I tell everybody I know, Hickory's the greatest community, and that we're big enough to have everything you want, but we're small enough to have nothing you don't want. We have no crime, we have no traffic, but we have great shopping, we have great restaurants, we have a great school system. We all know that, that's why we're here, right? We love it.
Another thing too, the bonds going out, the bond environment has been in less than 35, 40 years.
Exactly right. If we're gonna borrow, now is the time to borrow. Rates are low,
Interest rates
historic lows.
and
And they fluctuate a little bit, but they're basically historic lows. It's a good time, you're gonna get the most bang for your buck. Yeah.
What is Plan B?
I'm going to tell you Plan B, because I want to go with Plan A. Honestly, I don't think we have a Plan B. At this point, we've put our eggs in this basket. If the city council does decide to go forward with the bond referendum, and it does not pass, and on November 4th, I guess we'll figure out what do we do now.
Or is this one of our options, is not
Is what one of our options.
Plan B?
Yeah, but I think city council over the last 2 years has kind of said, this is the plan. This is where we feel like we need to go. Now, that being said, there's 7 of them. I might come in here in 2 weeks and throw out my budget to them and throw out this plan to adopt bonds, and they may vote it down 5-4. That'd be 9. I can't count to 7. They may vote it down 5-2. Ultimately, your city council, your elected officials are going to decide, is this the plan? Now, there is a plan, and I guess with 40 million, 30 million, 20 million, I kind of showed you. There's kind of a plan 1A, plan 1B, plan 1C. There's nuances within there, but it still comes down to, do we make big investments in this community through bonds or not? That's kind of the fundamental first question that council wants to wrestle with and decide, and you all decide ultimately by voting on it.
Plan B is raise the tax rate.
It could be. You could do a pay-as-you-go kind of thing where you raise the tax rate and just, if that generates $1 million a year, you spend that $1 million every year, and, it takes you 40 years to spend 40 million instead of 7 years to spend 40 million. By then, you're probably farther behind.
So the taxes have to go up either way.
Yeah. There is no magic formula here. If we're going to make investments, we are going to make investments. Every single one of us that owns property in this city is going to be making an investment. Again, if you've got a $150,000 home and you're paying $62.50 a month, and these bonds pass at $40 million, you are going to be paying $10 more a month. Yep. And that money will be going straight into the general fund of the city and paying for the improvements. Yeah, there's no way around it. There's no magic here. It's exactly that we all do within our own homes, right? My wife wants a new deck. She thinks our deck's falling apart. I'm going to have to come up with the money to build that deck.
Mick, is there any plan to attract regional or high-profile retailers to downtown Hickory?
There has been, and it has not been very successful. And there's a lot of whys with that, Les. We really made a hard run at Mass General Store several years ago. And they told us at the time that we didn't have the demographics that worked for them. From time to time, there are other people who start sniffing around and we make a run at them. But so far, you haven't had that. But I will tell you, everything that Andrea talked about and we've been talking about, when you bring residents downtown, when you bring businesses downtown, that's what your retailers are looking for. That's what they want. There was, at one point, there was some conversation about a Trader Joe's going in what is now the Transportation Insight Building. Well, Trader Joe's looked at our numbers and they said, they don't work. You're not our market. So it's kind of a chicken and egg thing. We got to bring the people and the jobs, and then the retailers will follow that. They don't get out in front of it, they follow it. That's a great question, Elizabeth.
Do you know the tax base of the other cities in North or South Carolina that are comparable size to Hickory?
I will tell you in general terms, we have been blessed with big tax base. Being a manufacturing community, you have a lot of tax base. Companies pay a lot more in taxes than residents do. And so we've done very well, and we've had a low tax rate. We've had good tax revenues. We used to get beat up because people say, well, your tax revenue per capita is higher than everybody else. And I'd say, what's wrong with that? That's a good thing. That means we got lots of businesses compared to the number of people we have. But as we've lost the businesses and the jobs, obviously that has slid down. I would say that we're still in that upper half. You know, I mean, we're not a bedroom community that has no business, has no shopping, but we're also not as vibrant and as large as a Greenville, South Carolina, as a Greensboro, as a Winston, you know, I mean, so they're going to be higher than us. Good question. Any other questions? Great discussion. Really appreciate y'all being here. Yep. And feel free to stay afterwards, but we do have other folks waiting in the legislative reception that started 15 minutes ago, so we don't want to keep you from that.
I think it's a great plan. But the thing that gives me pause is with the economic conditions in our country as they are right now, almost all of the economic advisors are saying, now is not the time to take on debt. You should be paying off as much of your personal debt as you can. Got your credit cards, don't take any new mortgages. And my question, is this the right time?
It's fair question. And then probably each one of us is going to have a different interpretation and answer for that. I mean, personally, we're seeing more activity now in the city for development than we've seen in a long time. And that's encouraging to us. We feel like, you know, there's always national economies and booms and busts and all kinds of stuff that you can't predict. If we did, we'd all be millionaires, but billionaires. But we feel like we're at the beginning of an upswing. And we feel like we don't want to miss that. We want to be part of that. Why don't we go ahead and you all dismiss, and anybody else wants to keep talking, I'll stay here all night. I don't want to hear the devil's advocate. No, I do.